Welcome, everyone. So as we get started, I just wanted to take a couple of moments rather to say welcome. We are here today to talk about or to recognize an important medal that we have at the American Institute of the History of Pharmacy, the George Urdang Medal Award. It is an award that we give every 2 years at the Institute, and it is for lifetime achievement in the history of pharmacy. And this year we have the wonderful opportunity to honor Dennis Worthen with this medal. We gave the medal last year. The way that our cycle works is we award the medal in the later part of an odd numbered year. So it's the 2025 George Urdang Medal Award, and the lecture is being presented in 2026. So a few housekeeping reminders. Please use the chat feature or the raise hand button to ask questions at the end of the presentation. Please keep yourself muted. And I'm actually going to turn off the unmute until the end. And then if you need closed captioning, select live transcript button to see that. And without further ado, I am pleased to have Cynthia Boyle, president of the American Institute of the History of Pharmacy.
I can't understand her, and I know you can. I don't see her though. Where is she?
We're going to have Cynthia take over.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I don't know if there's some muting that needs to happen there. I'll let Kristen work with that. So Kristen Husett, as our program manager, I'm sure her name is familiar to many or most of you, and appreciate her help today. There we go. Okay. I'm really delighted to introduce Dennis Worthen for the George Urdang Medal presentation. He completed, and some of this you may be familiar with, but you'll always learn something from his bio sketch, I am sure. He completed his undergraduate degree at the University of Michigan and his graduate degrees, plural, from Case Western Reserve University. After retirement from Procter & Gamble, he was associated with the Lloyd Library at Cincinnati from 1999 to 2014 and taught history of pharmacy courses at the University of Cincinnati Winkle College of Pharmacy from 1999 to 2017. Dennis has long been involved with AIHP. He was a frequent presenter at annual meetings in conjunction with APHA and published in Pharmacy and History. He served on the council from 2000 to 2003 and on the board from 2005 to 2008. He received 2 Fischelis grants to support his work on pharmacy in World War II, and in 2006 was elected to full membership of the International Academy of the History of Pharmacy. In 2010, he received the Kremers Lecture Award for Excellence in Pharmacohistorical Writing. And there's more. In 86 to 89, Dennis was awarded, this is interesting, the Allied Irish Bank Visiting Professorship at the College of Pharmacy in Queen's University, Belfast, Northern Ireland. I think that'll be a separate lecture later. In 1998, he received both the Linwood Tice Friend of APHA Academy of Student Pharmacist Award and the Phi Lambda Sigma National Leadership Award. In 2010, he was elected honorary president of APHA, and in 2015, the APHA Foundation named him the Jacob W. Miller Award recipient. In 2017, Phi Delta Chi named him honorary brother for his sustained contributions to the profession of pharmacy. And I know he's very generous with APHA Foundation, and I have experienced his generosity as a resource to educators. So with that, Dennis, please, we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Cynthia. It's wonderful to see the faces and some of the names, so thank you very much for coming. In a review of my book, Pharmacy in World War II, historian Lee Anderson stated that the work was a blend of descriptive narrative, demographic analysis, and prosopographic insight. Not to be overly modest, he also said some other nice things, but this was a sentence that really describes what I have attempted to do in my work in the history of pharmacy. Now, I'll return to this comment in a few minutes, but first I want to offer my thanks to AIHP for bestowing the award on me. AIHP has been an important part of my history of pharmacy activities over the past decades. The annual meetings of AIHP that were held in conjunction with the American Pharmacists Association were a great time to present research and meet others with a passion for the profession's history. The availability and breadth of the Kremer's files and the AIHP collections at the State Historical Society have meant many pleasant trips to Madison and times at the lake. One of my fun projects for AIHP was the preparation of pharmacy time capsules that were provided to state associations for use in their publications. Each carried the note that it was a service of AIHP. So each quarter for 8 years, I shared pharmacies related events that happened 25, 50, and 100 years earlier. The collegial support of Greg Higbee and the AIHP staff has been warm, freely extended, and always appreciated, as were the 2 Fishalis grants to support my work on pharmacy in World War II. And I also want to thank Kristen for helping with the Urdang presentation, especially the technical part. Luke asked if I would prepare some remarks on my work in pharmacy history. This offered an opportunity to look back and recall the stories that I was able to share about pharmacy with pharmacists and reflect on those who helped along the way. I certainly would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge and thank the friends and colleagues who thought highly enough of my work to nominate me for the Urdang Medal. Metalou Henderson, who initiated the nomination, and I go back to our much younger days in northern Michigan when she was at Ferris State College and I was a Squibb sales representative. Michael Posey believed in and facilitated the Hero Series for the Journal of the American Pharmacists Association. Bob Ellenboss and Ed Webb were partners in the editions of Clinical Pharmacy in the United States. Lucinda Main and John Gravenstein played roles in my work on the Millis Study Commission on Pharmacy and the memories of pharmacists who died on active duty during World War II. Thank you, one and all. I thought back to some no longer with us who were important in helping me on my history journey. George Griffenhagen, Dave Cowan, and Glenn Sonnedecker. George provided the images used in the Hero Series and shared his most personal memories of serving as a combat engineer during World War II. I still miss the early morning email exchanges with Dave as I was working through some of the World War II questions. And it was Glenn who, after some doubts about my interest in the history of pharmacy, nominated me for the International Academy of the History of Pharmacy. The help of editors, reviewers, and readers sometimes gets lost in the moment, but each and every one had a hand in my efforts. Likewise, the archivists and librarians were an important factor in facilitating access to that one fact, just one more, that made the research successful. However, the most important acknowledgement goes to Patty. She was an active partner in my history journey. She was always a willing companion for another research trip and a partner in digging through archives, copying reams of documents, and listening to flights of fancy and hoots of discovery when the obscure came into view. It was also her editorial efforts in presentations, papers, and books that helped shape the final product. I promise to return to Lee Anderson's quote because it really is the best description of my historical endeavors. He noted prosopographic insight, a term that is not in most people's everyday vocabulary. It certainly wasn't in mine when I retired from Procter & Gamble. What it really means is collective biography, or the study of a group of people through a collective examination of their lives, their careers. At some point, I certainly was aware of and influenced by George Urdang's observation that single great individuals can be found, and in fact, they emerge everywhere. It is the continuity of great men, remember when he wrote this, coming from pharmacy, which proves this our profession to be a particularly apt ground for the development of scientific talent and of the responsibility toward mankind that marks human greatness. While I was still working at P&G, I started asking pharmacy leaders who their professional heroes were. Most could name only a few, and those were mainly because of named awards or some personal relationship. There was little awareness of the men and women who saw the need for change and then worked to make it happen. This was the basis for my interest in and focus on telling the stories of pharmacy and pharmacists to pharmacists. As essayist Terence Dupre wrote, what we select to write about isn't a matter of choice as much as a matter of being chosen. As I started to transition to the history of pharmacy, the 25th anniversary of the Millis Study Commission on Pharmacy was fast approaching. I first met Jack Millis when I was a graduate student at Case Western Reserve University, and he was directing the Study Commission on Pharmacy. Later, we served together on a university committee. I thought that understanding the Study Commission's work and its impact, especially in light of the changes in practice and education, would be interesting. Fortunately, a number of colleagues and a publisher believed the same, and a roadmap to a profession's future, the Millis Study Commission on Pharmacy, was published. As a feature of the book, the American Association of Colleges of Pharmacy authorized a reprint of the final report, Pharmacists for the Future. In the foreword to the roadmap, Professor Mickey Smith wrote that the work is basic for anyone who would understand what has happened and is happening to those who practice the profession of pharmacy and those who teach those practitioners. A revised and reissued edition of the book was released in 2006 when the original went out of print. When I retired from P&G in 1999 and started visiting the Lloyd Library routinely, Mike Flannery approached me with a proposition to start a relationship that would last 16 years. He was interviewing for a position at the University of Alabama, Birmingham. The president and asked me to take his place at the Lloyd. When he accepted the position in Birmingham, the president of the Lloyd board offered me the position of executive director with the understanding that, like Mike, I was free to undertake any research I wanted. I was the executive director until 2001 and then Lloyd Scholar until 2014. Mike also taught the history of pharmacy course at the University of Cincinnati College of Pharmacy. I followed him in that role beginning in the fall semester of 1999. It was early in the transition that Mike and I were volunteered to write the sesquicentennial history of the College of Pharmacy, the first college of pharmacy west of the Alleghenies. Pharmaceutical education in the Queen City, 150 years of service. I had a great time teaching the elective course on American pharmacy. In 2013, a group of students approached me with a request to offer a course on the history of pharmacy in World War II. I agreed with the stipulation that they obtain the necessary approvals. In 2017, I stepped back from teaching, knowing that I would miss it, but it was time. One project that I'm very proud of, although it has had a relatively short life, was a book series that Mickey Smith and I developed from 1998 to 2007. The series, Pharmaceutical Heritage, Pharmaceutical Care Through History, was an imprint of Pharmaceutical Products Press, a division of Hayworth Press. In 2007, Hayworth was sold to Taylor and Francis Group, which discontinued the series. In 9 years, the series published 17 titles, including Mike Flannery's Civil War Pharmacy, Metalou Henderson's American Women Pharmacists, Contributions to the Profession, Stephen Prey's History of Non-Prescription Product Regulation, and a reprint of AIHP's publication of George Winston Smith's Medicines for the Union Army, the United States Army Laboratories during the Civil War. I do get my wars mixed up. In 1995, at the 50th anniversary at the end of World War II, I issued a call for pharmacists to share their memories of the conflict. The first letter that I received was from a retired pharmacist, Harvey Mamet of Syracuse. His memories covered the period from his 1943 graduation from the University of Buffalo, his work first in retail and then in penicillin plant production, drafted and assigned first as an infantryman and later as a medic, left behind with the European occupation forces, and assigned as a pharmacist reporting to a former truck driver. His letter provided insights into education and practice, as well as the arbitrary nature of the military of the period. With this introduction, I started to look at World War II from the perspective of pharmacists' experiences. The stories included those of students and faculty about the impact on education, of the accelerated 3-year curriculum, with enrollments made up mainly of women and men unable to serve due to physical restrictions. The stories continued with the post-war return of the students whose education had been interrupted and others on the GI Bill to overcrowded classrooms. The intransigence of the Army to commission pharmacists to serve as pharmacists was frequently shared. The insult of having control of pharmacy under unqualified non-pharmacists who had little idea of what they were doing was a common complaint. The position of the Army Medical Department was that any boy who could read was competent to dispense medications. All he needed was 90 days to prepare them. The fight, and fight it was, to establish the pharmacy corps, despite the dogged resistance of the physicians in command of the medical department, continued for years. Many pharmacists chose to gain commissions to lead, to serve in a non-pharmaceutical role, and to fight. Some letters, such as the one from Sam Kitabayashi, opened new areas of understanding. Sam was a second-generation American of Japanese descent, a Nisei, who graduated from the University of California, San Francisco in 1939 and opened his own drugstore in 1941. In 1942, he was forced to abandon his store and was removed to the Heart Mountain concentration camp in Wyoming, simply because he was of Japanese descent. After release, he returned to San Francisco, physically unable to ever again own his own store. As an aside, years later, his daughter, Sharon Leaf, and later his granddaughter, Megan Lau, both UCSF graduate pharmacists, contacted me for information about Sam. One of the most poignant stories that emerged was about the state selective service pharmacy advisory committees, which provided documentation to draft boards about whether a pharmacist was a necessary man needed more in the community than in the military. The story was never told, and the identity of the men serving on the advisory boards had never been publicly revealed. Richard Farrell was a Philadelphia College of Pharmacy graduate. He was drafted and sent to officers' candidate school, but washed out. When his pharmacist's father died, Richard applied for a discharge as a necessary man, but was unsuccessful. Assigned to a medical detachment of the 76th Infantry Division, part of Patton's Third Army, it arrived in France in January 1945 and was rushed into the Battle of the Bulge. Richard was killed in action February 7, 1945. While these stories were sad, even tragic, there were accounts full of humor and sacrifice that were centered around the shortages of the period. Pharmacists in community and institutional practice donated their quinine without any compensation because the troops needed it. In 9 months, over 150,000 ounces, 6.5 million 10-grain doses were donated. Many pharmacies were closed, as many as 15% nationally, or services restricted due to the shortage of men drafted into the military. Despite all of the challenges, pharmacy services were provided to the folks at home. Jack Olson recounted how his father's pharmacy in Los Angeles, responding to the rumor of shortages of sanitary napkins, stocked up. However, the shortage was of toilet paper instead. Shortages of ice cream and syrups, the staple of the drugstore soda fountains, forced many pharmacists to close the fountains. Jo Biedersmeyer recalled that her father posted a sign in his Lansdale, Pennsylvania pharmacy. "Damn that Hitler. We are out of whatever flavor again." I was proud when AIHP selected pharmacy in World War II for the 2010 Kremers Award. Now, one more comment about my World War II research. Cincinnati's Lloyd Library holds a magnificent pharmacy journal collection that exhaustively covers the war period. I turned the pages of every state, regional, and national pharmacy publication looking for information on pharmacists on the home front and in the military. The profession never compiled a census of those who served, although some states and colleges did. As I perused the journals, I developed a file of the names of those who served. Today, this file of almost 12,000 names includes those of 172 men who died on active duty. This was the source for the book documenting their service and deaths. We remember them, Pharmacies Fallen. A digital copy of this work is now freely available through AIHP. This file was also the source for an ongoing project with Metaloo, tentatively titled Women in World War II, Female Pharmacists in the Military, in Military Service, to document the lives of approximately 80 women pharmacists and student pharmacists who served in the military during World War II. When completed, a digital copy will be freely available through AIHP. I had a vision of developing a historical who's who of pharmacy when I started working in the Lloyd. The first step was to develop a list of officers and leaders of the national associations and the recipients of all the major awards. These efforts included finding and reading all of the association's presidential addresses, as well as the Remington and Whitney lectures. Some of the addresses were clarion calls, such as Rufus Lyman's 1917 AACP presidential address, where he pushed for dramatically increasing the educational standard from 2 years to 4 years within a very short period of time, and a recommendation to develop Rho Chi. This was followed years later by his Remington address, where he told those who were concerned by a possible surplus of pharmacists that no man in this room will live to see the day when there will be an oversupply of pharmacists, for the areas of service and avenues that lead to them will have become worldwide. In a very early paper, Edward Kremers took a strong stand against apprenticeship being more important than education, maintaining that university education prepared men and women to become more efficient in their calling. He continued this theme in his 1930 Remington address. Jerry Goyen, who led the effort at UCSF establishing the 9th floor experiment to put pharmacists on the general surgery floor, was a strong proponent for women and minority and pharmacists so that the profession would reflect the general population. As might be expected, there were also a number of addresses that were short both of length and memorable content. Having a long temporal window provided the opportunity to separate the truly important from the mostly mundane. I soon realized that such a work would not really accomplish what I wanted to do. A list of names, offices, and awards was the start of a project, a means to an end, not an end itself. However, it was a resource for two later projects, The Heroes of Pharmacy and the 2004 second edition compilation of the Remington Lectures with George Griffenhagen, Dick Penna, and Grover Bowles. In late 2001, I asked Michael Posey and Ron Teeter, then editors at the Journal of the American Pharmacists Association, if they would be interested in a column, which I described as a short biography of an individual and a brief consideration of how his or her contributions advanced the profession. I was shocked when they said yes, and even more so when the first article was due in 8 weeks. There were no restrictions about whom I could write. My criteria for inclusion was simple: dead and courageous, significant contributor, focused on professional, not personal gain. The biographical sketches were to be relatively short and focused on the professional contributions of the individual. They were not designed to capture extensive personal information. They certainly were not intended to be hagiographic. However, given the focus, at times they were. The series ran for 9 years, 2002 to 2010, and included 52 individuals, plus one about the founders of the American Pharmacists Association. APHA published a collection of the Heroes series as the Heroes of Pharmacy, Professional Leadership in Times of Change in 2 editions. In 2012, I wrote one additional sketch of Larry Weaver. No one ever challenged me about my choice to include an individual, at least not to my face. However, many shared a story from their own experience. There were even some heroes that I knew and had my own stories. George Archambault, Gloria and Don Francke, Jerry Goyen, Irv Rubin. It was difficult to assign a major area of activity to the heroes. They were multitasking overachievers. They populated every aspect of pharmacy: education, community and institutional practice, industry, government, publishing, association leadership, and military service. When I say populated, it doesn't mean that they were just participants or bystanders. Each of them advocated, pushed, prodded, chevied, and maybe even coerced change. Each faced great risk and came under fire to move the profession forward, despite heated opposition or the cold of indifference. I've been asked many times who my favorite heroes were and why. This was a common question when I visited colleges to talk about professional heroes. Like any parent, my usual response was that they were all my favorites when I wrote about them. This was not just dissembling, I meant it. If I didn't admire them at some level, I would not have chosen to include them. However, once I completed the series and had the opportunity to reflect on the group, there were some who held a greater personal appeal. I gave away the secret in my 2010 Kremer's lecture when I described the dinner party that I wanted to assemble. Rufus Lyman, one of pharmacy's most lovable and irascible characters, was the host. Attendees and the sobriquets that I assigned to them included George Archambault, pharmacy's change agent, Zeta Cooper, advocate of women in pharmacy, Henry Heinsohn, community pharmacist advocate, Edward Kremers, pharmaceutical education reformer. Paul Parker, visionary innovator. Joseph Remington, teacher of teachers, and Daniel Smith, patriarch of American pharmacy. Years later, I would still like to attend a dinner with these same change agents. And a full biography of Rufus Lyman continues to languish on my bucket list. From time to time, a colleague would ask, seriously, whether I had or would consider a series about the villains of pharmacy. My response was always no. I was more interested in sharing positive role models than in giving attention to a negative individual. In 2000, AACP held its centennial meeting in Boston. The featured speaker was Pulitzer Prize historian Doris Kearns Goodwin. She spoke about her most recent book, Wait Till Next Year, a memoir of her childhood, the Cold War, and baseball. The audience was enthralled by her narrative. During the Q&A period, someone asked if she had ever considered doing a biography of Richard Nixon. She had already published books about Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt, Lyndon Johnson, and the Fitzgeralds and Kennedys. Her response was a simple statement that at some level, a biographer must like her subject. The biographer spends years immersed in the subject's life and story. And then she moved on to the next question. Obviously, she did not hold much affection for Nixon. Just as I was not interested in telling stories about negative pharmacists. Beginning in 2000 through 2005, I wrote several history columns for the International Journal of Pharmaceutical Compounding. These focused on pharmacy museums and compounding. Lloyd Allen, the founding editor, was interested in history, and the cover of each issue of the journal was of a historical mortar and pestle. In 2006, Pharmacy Practice News invited me to write a monthly column on pharmacy history topics of my choosing. I was free to choose any topic as long as it was of broad appeal to pharmacists. The column, titled Pharmacy Heritage, continued until 2010. In 2007, Mike Maddox of the American College of Clinical Pharmacy asked if I would review a book proposal on the history of clinical pharmacy in the United States. The idea was to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the college by developing a history of the clinical pharmacy movement, not of the college itself. The proposal was excellent, something that I would have loved to have had for the Hayworth History series. Subsequently, I was invited to join Bob Ellenboss in writing the first edition of Clinical Pharmacy in the United States, Transformation of a Profession. This work chronicled the evolution of what we now call clinical pharmacy from its beginnings in 1921 to 2009. 10 years later, ACCP wanted an updated edition to cover the period through 2019. Ed Webb joined Bob and I in preparing the new edition. For me, this project was a natural segue from a roadmap to a profession's future, the Millis Study Commission on Pharmacy. So, why did I focus on collective biography? It's because it affords the opportunity to not only study the men and women who effect great change, it allows one to study the men and women who are affected by great change. It provides a way to tell the stories that are of most interest to pharmacists. I am proud that a reviewer of pharmacy in World War II noted that it will attract practicing pharmacists, that heroes of pharmacy, professional leadership in times of change, could grace the shelves of many pharmacists' personal libraries, and that clinical pharmacy in the United States, Transformation of a Profession, should be required reading for all pharmacy students, residents, fellows, and practitioners. My goal of telling stories of pharmacy to pharmacists was met. Hugo Schaefer, the individual responsible for the creation of the Remington Medal, told Rufus Lyman, the 1947 recipient, that the medal was his swan song. He was through, without portfolio and without vote. Lyman, being the contrarian that he had been for his entire life, paid scant attention. Subsequently, he was recruited as the founding dean of the College of Pharmacy at the University of Arizona. Similarly, the recipient of the Urdang Medal in recognition of lifetime achievement does not signal my fading away. I still have stories that need to be done, questions that need answering, and stories of pharmacy to tell pharmacists. And I look forward to that. Thank you very much.